Welcome to Fun Facts Online. Today, we're delving into the history of the Gaza Strip, a small piece of land that has been a central point of geopolitical struggle for over a century. Its story is a complex tapestry of empires, nationalism, conflict, and human tragedy. We'll trace its journey from the early 20th century to the present day. Let's begin with the fall of one empire and the rise of another. The modern history of Gaza starts as the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the region for 400 years, crumbled during World War I. In 1917, British forces captured Palestine, including Gaza, from the Ottomans. 5 years later, in 1922, the League of Nations officially granted Britain a mandate to govern Palestine. This mandate contained a fundamental contradiction. On one hand, Britain was supposed to guide the local Arab population toward self-governance. On the other, it was tasked with implementing the 1917 Balfour Declaration, which supported establishing a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. During this period, Palestine underwent major changes. The British administration built new infrastructure, but growing tensions overshadowed this development. Jewish immigration to the region increased, with many fleeing persecution in Europe. The indigenous Palestinian Arab population feared losing their land and national identity. This influx of people and capital created a significant economic gap. The Jewish sector grew much faster, and this disparity, along with disputes over land and water, fueled political violence. In Gaza, just like the rest of Palestine, Arab demands for independence and resistance to the Zionist project intensified. British policies on immigration and land sales failed to satisfy either side, often making things worse. This widespread discontent erupted in the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, a major uprising against British rule and Zionist immigration. By 1947, Britain, unable to resolve the conflicting claims, handed the Palestine problem over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed Resolution 181, a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem under international control. The territory of Gaza was designated for the proposed Arab state. While Jewish leadership accepted the plan, it was rejected by Palestinian Arabs and neighboring Arab states, setting the stage for war. The British mandate ended on May 15, 1948. On that very day, the State of Israel was proclaimed. Immediately, armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, alongside Palestinian militias, entered the territory. This conflict, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, had a catastrophic impact on the Palestinian population, an event they call the Nakba, or catastrophe. Around 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes in the areas that became Israel. The Gaza Strip, which had an initial population of about 80,000, saw its numbers explode as over 200,000 displaced Palestinians sought refuge there. This massive influx created a severe humanitarian crisis, with thousands living in makeshift refugee camps. The war ended with armistice agreements in 1949. The Gaza Strip, a narrow territory 25 miles long, came under Egyptian military administration. Its new boundaries were drawn in the Egyptian-Israeli Armistice Agreement. From 1949 to 1967, life under Egyptian rule was difficult. Egypt never annexed Gaza or granted citizenship to its residents. Movement was severely restricted, preventing people from seeking work elsewhere. The refugees depended heavily on aid from the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, for basic necessities. These dire conditions and a sense of statelessness fueled the rise of the Palestinian Fedayeen, or commandos, who launched raids into Israel. Israeli reprisals followed, creating a constant cycle of violence along the border. Gaza became a hub for this insurgency. During the 1956 Suez Crisis, Israeli forces briefly occupied the Strip for 4 months before withdrawing under international pressure. Egyptian administration was restored in 1957 and continued for another decade. The Middle East was transformed again by the Six-Day War in June 1967. After Egypt blocked the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The war ended in a decisive Israeli victory. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The 1967 war began a long period of Israeli military occupation for the Gaza Strip. Another wave of displacement occurred, with some 300,000 Palestinians fleeing the newly occupied territories. Israel established a military administration to govern the civilian population. A particularly contentious part of this occupation was the establishment of Israeli settlements. The first settlement in Gaza, Kfar Darum, was founded in 1970. By the early 1990s, there were 21 settlements. While only housing a few thousand settlers, they controlled a disproportionate amount of land and water resources, over 25% of the land by 1991. The confiscation of land for settlements and the construction of bypass roads for settlers fragmented Palestinian territory and crippled agriculture. Life under military administration was defined by restrictions. The Israeli authorities required permits for everything from building projects to holding meetings. The Gazan economy became increasingly dependent on Israel, with many Palestinians working as laborers in Israel, while local economic development was stifled. Palestinian resistance took various forms. In the early years, armed groups like the PFLP and Fatah were active. Israel responded with force, largely suppressing this armed resistance by the early 1970s. But resentment simmered, and a new generation that had known nothing but occupation was coming of age. By December 1987, after 20 years of occupation, Palestinian frustration exploded into the First Intifada, an Arabic word meaning shaking off. The trigger was a traffic accident in Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, where an Israeli military truck killed 4 Palestinian workers. The event sparked mass protests that quickly spread to the West Bank. The First Intifada was primarily a grassroots uprising. It was characterized by mass demonstrations, civil disobedience, general strikes, and stone-throwing youths. Israel responded with an iron fist policy, using live ammunition, mass arrests, and collective punishments like curfews and home demolitions. During this uprising, Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, emerged as a militant offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, challenging the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. The sustained intifada brought the Palestinian issue back to the world stage and created an opening for a political solution. This led to secret negotiations between Israel and the PLO in Oslo, Norway. The talks resulted in the 1993 Oslo Accord, followed by the Gaza-Jericho Agreement in 1994 and the Oslo II Accord in 1995. These accords established the Palestinian Authority, or PA, as an interim self-governing body and planned for a phased Israeli withdrawal from parts of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. In 1994, Israeli forces left Gaza City and PLO chairman Yasser Arafat returned from exile to establish the PA's headquarters in Gaza. For the first time, Palestinians had a degree of self-rule. However, the Oslo years were filled with problems. The most difficult issues, the status of Jerusalem, refugees, and final borders, were left for final status negotiations that never concluded. The PA's authority was limited. The West Bank was divided into areas A, B, and C, with Israel maintaining full control over more than 60% of the territory. In Gaza, Israel still controlled settlements, military zones, and the borders. The economic situation for many Palestinians did not improve. Israeli closures of the territories, often in response to security incidents, crippled the economy, leading to high unemployment. The initial optimism of the Oslo Accords faded, replaced by disillusionment. Many Palestinians saw the PA as ineffective and felt the peace process had stalled. Meanwhile, Israeli settlement expansion continued. undermining the spirit of the agreements. The failure of the Camp David summit in 2000 to reach a final agreement only deepened the sense of hopelessness. In September 2000, these simmering frustrations erupted into the Second Intifada. The trigger was a controversial visit by then-Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem, a site holy to both Muslims and Jews. This uprising was far more violent than the first. It featured widespread armed confrontations, including suicide bombings by Palestinian militant groups against Israeli civilians, and large-scale Israeli military operations. The conflict resulted in thousands of deaths, the majority of them Palestinian. The violence had a devastating effect on the Palestinian economy and society. Israeli military incursions, closures, and the construction of a separation barrier in the West Bank led to a severe economic downturn and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Amidst this violence, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, a longtime supporter of settlements, announced a stunning policy reversal, a plan for unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip. Proposed in 2003, the plan involved evacuating all 21 Israeli settlements in Gaza and 4 in the northern West Bank, as well as withdrawing all Israeli military forces from inside the Strip. The stated goal was to improve Israel's security and reduce friction. Some observers also pointed to demographic concerns, as the growing Palestinian population in Gaza posed a challenge to Israel's identity as a Jewish and democratic state. Critics, however, suggested the disengagement was a way to freeze the peace process and prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. In 2005, the disengagement was implemented. It was a traumatic event for the roughly 9,000 Israeli settlers who were forcibly evacuated. For Palestinians, the withdrawal was met with mixed feelings. It marked the end of a 38-year direct military occupation inside Gaza, but it wasn't full sovereignty. Israel maintained control over Gaza's airspace, coastline, and its borders with Israel. The period following the disengagement was one of political turmoil. The Palestinian Authority, led by Fatah's Mahmoud Abbas, struggled to establish control in Gaza. Hamas and its supporters viewed the withdrawal not as a peace gesture, but as a victory for armed resistance. This perception, combined with disillusionment over Fatah's governance, led to a shocking victory for Hamas in the 2006 Palestinian legislative elections. The Hamas victory created a power struggle. The international community, including the US and EU, designated Hamas as a terrorist organization and imposed economic sanctions. Internal Palestinian tensions boiled over in June 2007. In a brief but brutal civil conflict known as the Battle of Gaza, Hamas seized full control of the Gaza Strip. This created a deep political split: a Hamas-led government in Gaza and a Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. In response to the Hamas takeover in 2007, Israel and Egypt imposed a tight blockade on the Gaza Strip, severely restricting the movement of people and goods. The stated purpose was to prevent Hamas from importing weapons and to pressure its rule. However, the blockade has had a devastating impact on Gaza's economy and its 2.3 million residents, leading to widespread condemnation as a form of collective punishment. The years since the blockade began have been marked by a recurring cycle of devastating military conflicts between Israel and Hamas. These have been triggered by various factors, including rocket fire from Gaza, Israeli military operations, and broader political tensions. There have been several major military escalations. Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009 was a 3-week Israeli offensive that resulted in over 1,400 Palestinian deaths. Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012 was an 8-day operation that killed over 160 Palestinians. Operation Protective Edge in 2014 was a 7-week war, the deadliest up to that point, resulting in over 200 Palestinian deaths, mostly civilians. The 2021 Israel-Palestine crisis was an 11-day conflict sparked by tensions in Jerusalem. And the most recent and destructive conflict began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, killing around 200 people and taking over 250 hostages. Israel's response, an unprecedented air and ground offensive, has created a catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, with a staggering death toll, widespread destruction, and mass displacement. The blockade and the recurrent wars have shattered life in Gaza. The economy is in ruins, with unemployment and poverty among the highest in the world. The healthcare system is near collapse, and access to clean water and electricity is severely limited. The psychological toll, especially on children who have lived through multiple wars, is immense. International efforts to broker a lasting peace have repeatedly failed. The two-state solution, envisioning an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, seems more distant than ever. Deep-seated mistrust, unresolved core issues, and internal political divisions on both sides are formidable obstacles. The century-long history of the Gaza conflict is a stark reminder of the tragic consequences of unresolved political disputes. It is a story of a land and a people caught between powerful forces, a story of unfulfilled dreams, and a conflict that continues to exact an immense human toll. The future of Gaza and the entire region remains precariously balanced between the hope for a just peace and the grim reality of a seemingly endless cycle of violence.